My name is Clara, and if you'd told me a year ago that I would be sitting here today, recounting the story of how I single-handedly froze operations in 19 countries with just 13 words, I wouldn't have believed you. Not because it sounds impossible, it does, but because back then I was just another cog in the corporate machine. A faceless employee who clocked in every morning at 8 o'clock sharp, sipped her coffee while staring blankly at spreadsheets, and went home exhausted but unfulfilled by 7 p.m. I worked for Titanic's Global Solutions, one of those multinational conglomerates whose name everyone recognizes, but no one really knows what they do. They made everything from software to snacks, or so their PR team liked to boast. My role? Mid-level data analyst. Nothing glamorous, nothing world-changing. Just numbers on screens, reports sent to managers who barely glanced at them, and meetings where my voice rarely mattered. But let's rewind a bit further than that. Let's go to the moment everything changed. The day I got fired in 39 seconds flat. It started like any other Monday. The alarm blared too early. The subway smelled faintly of burnt toast. And my boss, Greg, greeted me with his usual mix of indifference and thinly veiled disdain. He called me into his office before I even had time to settle into my desk chair. "Clara," he said without looking up from his laptop, "we need to talk." Now, when someone says we need to talk in an office setting, your stomach drops faster than a lead balloon. Still, I tried to keep calm. Maybe this was about last quarter's report? Or perhaps there was some new project coming my way. Wrong. Dead wrong. Before I could even sit down, Greg leaned back in his leather chair and delivered the news as casually as if he were ordering lunch. "You're being let go." "What?" I stammered, sure I'd misheard him. Being fired wasn't something I'd ever imagined happening to me. Sure, I wasn't climbing the corporate ladder at lightning speed, but I showed up on time, did my job well enough, and stayed out of trouble. What more could anyone ask for? Greg didn't bother explaining. Instead, he handed me a folder containing my severance package details, a measly 2 weeks' pay, and muttered something about restructuring. Restructuring? That's corporate speak for, we don't actually know why we're firing you, but we'll make it sound official. It took all of 39 seconds for my entire professional life to unravel right in front of me. 39 seconds to wipe away 5 years of hard work, dedication, and loyalty. As I sat there, stunned, anger began bubbling inside me. Anger not just at Greg, but at the system itself, the soulless bureaucracy that chewed people up and spat them out without a second thought. As I packed my belongings into a cardboard box, yes, cliché boxes still exist, I couldn't help but notice the irony. Just yesterday, I'd been crunching numbers for a presentation on employee retention strategies. Today, I was Exhibit A in their failure. But here's the thing about anger. It can either consume you or fuel you. For me, it did both. On one hand, I spent days wallowing in self-pity, replaying the scene in Greg's office over and over again in my head. Why me? What had I done wrong? On the other hand, something deep within me stirred. Something primal and defiant. If Titanics thought they could discard me like yesterday's trash, they were sorely mistaken. Little did they know their decision to fire me would set off a chain reaction neither of us could have anticipated. The first few weeks after losing my job were rough. I applied to dozens of positions, only to receive generic rejection emails or outright silence. Each rejection felt like a punch to the gut, reinforcing the idea that maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe Greg was right to cut me loose. But buried beneath the doubt was a simmering frustration, a desire to prove not just to Titanics, but to myself, that I was worth more than they gave me credit for. One evening, as I scrolled through LinkedIn posts filled with polished smiles and vague accomplishments, I stumbled upon something intriguing. A former colleague of mine, Mia, had shared an article exposing unethical practices within Titanics' supply chain management division. According to the report, the company had been cutting corners on safety regulations in several overseas factories, leading to hazardous working conditions for thousands of employees. Worse yet, these violations weren't isolated incidents. They were systemic, spanning across multiple countries and departments. At first, I dismissed it as typical corporate scandal fodder. Companies screw up. Whistleblowers blow the whistle. Rinse and repeat. But then I remembered something Greg had said during my termination meeting. Between his rehearsed lines about restructuring and moving forward, he dropped a casual comment about cleaning house. At the time, I assumed he meant layoffs. Now, though, it struck me differently. What if cleaning house wasn't just about firing underperformers like me? What if it was code for covering tracks, getting rid of anyone who might stumble upon inconvenient truths? That night, sleep eluded me. My mind raced with possibilities, piecing together fragments of conversations, memos, and reports I'd seen during my tenure at Titanics. Suddenly, certain things clicked into place. Remember that supply chain optimization project I worked on last year? The one where I noticed discrepancies in cost allocations, but shrugged them off as accounting errors? What if those weren't errors at all? And what about the sudden influx of high-profile clients around the same time? Clients whose contracts seemed unusually rushed and secretive? By morning, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Justice for the workers exploited by Titanics' greed. Justice for myself and others discarded without cause, and justice for the truth buried under layers of corporate lies. But taking on a multinational corporation wasn't going to be easy. I needed evidence, solid, irrefutable proof that would expose their wrongdoing to the world. So I dug deep. I scoured old files saved on external drives, reached out to former colleagues under the guise of catching up, and even managed to hack into Titanics' internal server using credentials I'd memorized during my time there. It wasn't legal, but desperation has a funny way of bending morality. Slowly but surely, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Emails revealing falsified inspection reports, budget sheets showing funds diverted to shell companies, photos of factory floors teeming with hazards ignored by management. And then came the breakthrough. The discovery that tied everything together. Buried in a folder labeled Confidential, Do Not Share, was a document outlining a plan codenamed Operation Icebreaker. Its purpose? To temporarily halt operations in key regions whenever potential leaks threatened exposure. By freezing activity, Titanics could buy themselves time to cover their tracks and discredit whistleblowers. It was chillingly efficient and utterly damning. Armed with this information, I crafted my message carefully. 13 words designed to strike fear into the heart of Titanics' leadership. Operation Icebreaker compromised. Evidence secured. Prepare for global shutdown effective immediately. Short, sharp, and loaded with implications. I sent it anonymously to every senior executive listed in the company directory, along with copies to major news outlets and regulatory agencies worldwide. Within hours, chaos erupted. Factories ground to a halt. Offices emptied out as panicked employees scrambled to understand what was happening. Stock prices plummeted as investors fled en masse. And somewhere in the midst of it all, I watched silently from the sidelines, marveling at the power of 13 simple words. But this isn't the end of the story. Far from it. Because, while Titanics may have been brought to its knees, questions remain. Questions about accountability, redemption, and whether true justice can ever truly be served. For now, though, I'll leave you with this. Sometimes the smallest actions carry the biggest consequences. And sometimes being fired in 39 seconds can lead to the most unexpected opportunities of all. The fallout from my 13-word message was swift and brutal. Titanic's Global Solutions, once a shining beacon of corporate success, became the poster child for greed and corruption overnight. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story. Every headline screamed louder than the last. Multinational giant exposed. Unsafe practices put thousands at risk, or asterisk inside Operation Icebreaker. How one message brought down an empire. Asterisk investigative journalists swarmed, like bees to honey, uncovering layer after layer of deceit that even I hadn't fully grasped. But while the world watched Titanics crumble under the weight of its own lies, I found myself wrestling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was satisfaction, a deep, primal sense of vindication. They had treated me as expendable, disposable, and now they were reaping what they had sown. Yet, on the other hand, there was unease. What had I unleashed? Yes, Titanics deserved to be held accountable. But what about the thousands of innocent employees who suddenly found themselves out of work? The factory workers in developing countries whose livelihoods depended on those unsafe jobs? Had I become the very thing I despised, a cog in a ruthless machine? For days, I avoided turning on the news, unable to stomach the images of shuttered factories and tearful workers clutching pink slips. Instead, I buried myself in research, trying to piece together a plan to mitigate the damage. It wasn't just guilt driving me, it was responsibility. If I had started this fire, it was up to me to help put it out. My first step was reaching out to Mia, the former colleague who had shared the exposé that sparked my investigation. She agreed to meet me at a quiet cafe downtown, where we sat huddled over coffee as I explained everything. To her credit, she didn't judge me or question my motives. Instead, she listened intently, nodding along as I laid out my thoughts. By the time I finished, she was leaning forward, eyes alight with determination. "You've got guts, Clara," she said finally. "But you're right, this can't end with destruction. We need to rebuild." Together, we began drafting a proposal. It wasn't easy. Neither of us were experts in labor law or international policy, but we knew people who were. Over the next few weeks, we reached out to lawyers, activists, and economists, piecing together a framework for reform. Our goal was simple yet ambitious. Turn Titanic's collapse into an opportunity to create something better, something ethical, something sustainable. We called it Project Phoenix. The name fit not only because it symbolized rising from the ashes, but also because it represented hope. Hope for the displaced workers, hope for the communities affected by Titanic's negligence, and hope for a future where corporations prioritized humanity over profit. As word of our efforts spread, support poured in from unexpected places. Former Titanic's employees offered their expertise, eager to contribute to something meaningful after years of feeling powerless. Local nonprofits rallied behind us, providing resources and connections. Even some of Titanic's former clients expressed interest in partnering with Project Phoenix, citing their desire to align with companies committed to transparency and accountability. Yet despite the growing momentum, challenges loomed large. For every ally we gained, there seemed to be two detractors ready to tear us down. Some accused me of hypocrisy, pointing out that my actions had caused widespread suffering. Others dismissed Project Phoenix as naive idealism, claiming that no business could succeed without cutting corners. And then there were the legal threats from Titanic's remaining executives, determined to silence me before I could do any more damage. It was during one of these tense moments that I received a call from someone I never expected to hear from again. Greg, my old boss. His voice was tight, almost panicked when he spoke. "Clara, we need to talk." I nearly hung up on him right then and there. After everything he'd done, firing me without cause, treating me like garbage. Why should I give him the time of day? But curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want, Greg?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his tone was different, not the usual condescending drawl, but something softer, almost vulnerable. "Look, I know I messed up. With you, with everyone. But if you think I'm calling to beg for forgiveness, you're wrong. This isn't about me. It's about stopping this thing before it goes too far." "Too far?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean exposing your company's crimes? Holding you accountable?" "No," he snapped, then sighed heavily. "Yes. Okay, fine, we screwed up. Big time. But dismantling Titanic's won't fix anything. All it does is leave a vacuum. And trust me, the people who fill that vacuum will make us look like saints." His words gave me pause. As much as I hated to admit it, he had a point. Taking down Titanic's had been cathartic, but it wasn't a solution. Not on its own. Still, I wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily. "So what are you suggesting? That I sweep everything under the rug and pretend none of this happened?" "Of course not," he said quickly. "But maybe there's another way. A compromise." A compromise. The idea was laughable, given everything that had transpired. Yet, as I considered it, a kernel of possibility began to form. Maybe Greg wasn't entirely wrong. Maybe dismantling Titanic's wasn't the answer, but neither was letting them continue unchecked. Perhaps there was a middle ground, a way to force real change without destroying everything in the process. "What did you have in mind?" I asked cautiously. He hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. "Meet me tomorrow. There's someone you need to talk to." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The following afternoon, I arrived at the designated meeting spot, a nondescript office building on the outskirts of the city. Greg was waiting for me outside, pacing nervously. He ushered me inside without a word, leading me to a conference room where a man in his late 50s sat waiting. His suit was immaculate, his posture rigid, but his eyes betrayed a weariness that suggested he'd seen too much. "This is Marcus Hale," Greg introduced him. Well, let's just say he knows things." Marcus stood and extended a hand, which I shook reluctantly. "Ms. Clara," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't come here to chat," I replied bluntly. "What do you want?" Marcus smiled faintly. Straight to the point. I admire that. "Very well, let me be clear. I represent a group of investors who stand to lose everything if Titanic collapses completely. But unlike certain parties," he shot a pointed glance at Greg, "we recognize the necessity of change. Radical change. And what exactly does that entail?" I asked, skepticism dripping from my tone. "A complete overhaul," Marcus replied. "New leadership, new policies, new priorities. Transparency, accountability, sustainability, all the things Titanic has lacked for far too long. But it won't happen unless someone steps in to guide the transition. Someone credible. Someone trusted." He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "That someone is you." Me. The thought was absurd. I was nobody, a fired data analyst with a grudge and a knack for stirring up trouble. How could I possibly lead such a massive undertaking? Yet, as I stared back at Marcus, I realized he wasn't joking. This wasn't just an offer, it was a challenge. A chance to take everything I'd fought for and channel it into something constructive. But accepting wouldn't be easy. For one thing, it meant working alongside people I didn't trust, people like Greg, whose hands were stained with complicity. For another, it meant stepping into the lion's den, risking everything I'd worked for in pursuit of an uncertain outcome. Was I ready for that? Could I forgive the sins of the past in order to build a better future? As I left the meeting that day, my mind raced with possibilities. This was a crossroads, a moment that would define not just my life, but the lives of countless others. Whatever choice I made, there would be no turning back. After days of deliberation, I made my decision. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't without risk, but deep down, I knew this was the only path that truly mattered. I agreed to work with Marcus and his group of investors, not because I trusted them, but because I saw an opportunity to rewrite the rules, to turn Titanic into something it had never been before, a force for good. The transition wasn't smooth. There were power struggles, backlash from old executives clinging to their crumbling empire, and moments when I doubted whether I'd made the right choice. But slowly, progress began to take shape. Factories reopened under strict, new safety regulations. Workers were given fair wages, benefits, and a voice in how things operated. Transparency became non-negotiable, with regular audits and open forums ensuring accountability at every level. As for Greg, he stayed on in a limited capacity, less out of necessity than as a reminder of where Titanic had come from. Watching him navigate the new reality was almost poetic. The man who once dismissed me as expendable now reported directly to me. Karma has a funny way of balancing the scales. In time, Project Phoenix grew beyond Titanic. Its principles inspired other companies to follow suit, sparking a movement toward ethical business practices worldwide. And while I'll never claim to have saved the world, I know I helped tip the scales just enough to make a difference. Looking back, I realized that being fired in 39 seconds wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning. Those 13 words didn't just freeze operations in 19 countries. They ignited a chain reaction that changed lives, including mine. And sometimes that's all you can ask for, a second chance to do better.